In 1990, Tokyo was the most expensive city on the planet. A cup of coffee cost more than a meal in New York. A melon, one single melon, could cost $100. Businessmen joked that it was cheaper to fly to San Francisco for the weekend than to play golf in Japan. 35 years later, something almost impossible has happened. Tokyo, the neon capital of the world's fourth-largest economy, is now cheaper than Ohio. A one-bedroom apartment in central Tokyo rents for less than one in Louisville, Kentucky. This is not a story about a country getting poorer. It's stranger than that. It's the story of a country where time, economic time, simply stopped. Today on the Money Atlas, how the richest country of the 20th century froze its own prices for 30 years, and what it costs to wake up. Quick thing before we dig in. If you enjoy stories that make the world make sense, subscribing is the best way to see the next one, and it costs you nothing. All right, let's get into it. Start with the world's simplest economic indicator, the Big Mac. Same burger, same recipe everywhere on Earth. In Switzerland, the country from our first episode, it costs about $8. In America, $5.79. And in Japan, the world's fourth-largest economy, $3.11, cheaper than China. By the Big Mac measure, the Japanese yen is undervalued by roughly 50%, one of the deepest discounts of any major currency on Earth. Overall, living in Japan now costs about 30% less than living in the United States. Rent, 60% less. How does the country that once terrified American CEOs become the discount aisle of the developed world? To understand the freeze, you have to understand the fever that came before it. December 29, 1989. Japan's stock market closes at 38,915, its all-time high. Japanese companies are buying Rockefeller Center and Columbia Pictures. Land in Tokyo is so expensive that, on paper, the grounds of the Imperial Palace, 1 square kilometer of gardens, are worth more than every building and every acre in the entire state of California. Banks are lending against land that only ever goes up. Everyone knows it can't last. Nobody wants to be the first to say it. It was the largest asset bubble in human history, and then it popped. The crash didn't look like a crash. It looked like a slow puncture. Stocks fell for 13 years until the market had lost nearly 80% of its value. Commercial land in the big cities fell even harder. The banks, stuffed with loans backed by that land, spent a decade pretending everything was fine, propping up bankrupt companies that the press nicknamed zombies. Here's the number that captures it all. The Nikkei did not see 38,915 again until February 2024. 35 years. An entire working lifetime just to get back to zero. And somewhere in that long, quiet slide, something broke deep inside Japan's economic psychology. That broken thing has a name: deflation, falling prices. And here's the counterintuitive part: falling prices sound wonderful. Who doesn't want things to get cheaper? But follow the loop. If prices will be lower next year, you wait. Everyone waits, so businesses sell less. So they cut wages and cancel investments. So people have less money and prices fall again. Meanwhile, every debt gets heavier because you're repaying it with money that's worth more than the money you borrowed. Deflation is quicksand, gentle on the surface and almost impossible to climb out of. Japan fell in around 1998 and stayed in for 15 years. Now look at what the quicksand did to paychecks. Japanese real wages, what salaries actually buy, peaked in 1997. Since then, they have fallen about 11%, not stagnated, fallen. Over the same 30 years, American real wages rose about a third. South Korean wages nearly doubled. Japan is the only major developed economy on Earth where a worker in 2025 earns less, in real terms, than their parents did in the 90s. An entire generation entered the workforce, worked diligently for 3 decades, and never once experienced the basic economic event the rest of the world takes for granted: a real raise. If you want to feel how deep the freeze went, forget the statistics. Consider the umebo. It's a puffed corn snack, a childhood icon, and it cost 10 yen, about 7 cents, from 1979 to 2022. 43 years, one price. When rising ingredient costs finally forced the maker to charge 12 yen, the company was so nervous it took out advertisements to apologize to the nation. Economists call this a deflationary mindset, an entire society where raising prices feels immoral, where companies would rather quietly shrink the product than touch the sticker. When your customers haven't had a raise in 30 years, charging more isn't business. It's betrayal. Japan's central bank tried everything and invented half the tools other countries would later use. In 1999, it cut interest rates to 0. First in the modern world. Not enough. In 2001, it invented quantitative easing, creating money to buy bonds, years before anyone in the West had heard of it. Not enough. In 2016, it went negative, charging banks for the privilege of holding money. The Bank of Japan eventually owned more than half the government bond market and was buying stocks by the billion. It was the greatest monetary experiment in history, and for 2 decades, inflation barely moved. You can print money. You cannot print the belief that tomorrow will cost more than today. But all that printing had a delayed price, and it was paid by the currency. For decades, the yen was a fortress. Then the world's interest rates rose after 2021, and Japan's, anchored by all that debt, could not follow. Money flowed out, chasing better returns. The yen went from 110 to the dollar to nearly 160, its weakest in almost 40 years. Measured by real purchasing power, the yen today buys less than half of what it did in 1986. Combine 30 years of frozen prices with a currency cut in half, and you get the headline of this video. For anyone holding dollars or euros, Japan is now the cheapest rich country on Earth. The world noticed. In 2025, a record 42.7 million tourists landed in Japan, nearly double the number from just before the pandemic. They came for the temples and the ramen, but they stayed for the receipts. Americans discovering that a Michelin-listed lunch in Tokyo costs less than a food court burger at home. Luxury handbags cheaper than in Paris. Ski resorts charging half of what Colorado does. Tourism has become one of Japan's biggest exports. The country now effectively sells the experience of its own frozen prices. For visitors, Deflation Japan is paradise. But walk the same streets with a Japanese paycheck and the picture inverts. Because cheap Japan is only cheap if your money comes from somewhere else. For the Japanese, the weak yen means everything imported, energy, wheat, medicine, iPhones, has quietly exploded in price, while wages stayed in 1997. A new iPhone costs weeks of an average salary. A family trip to America, once routine for the middle class, is now a luxury few attempt. Young engineers discover that the same job pays double in Seoul, Sydney, or San Francisco, and some of Japan's best talent is starting to leave. The country isn't a bargain to its own people. It's a place where the world got richer and they didn't. Here's the milestone that stung the most. South Korea, a country Japan colonized, a country that was 5 times poorer within living memory, now pays its average worker more than Japan does. On OECD figures, Korean average wages passed Japanese wages several years ago, and the gap keeps widening. Taiwan is close behind. This is what 3 frozen decades compound into. Not a crisis, never a crash, just a slow, silent slide down the league table, one non-raise at a time. Deflation never sends you a bill. It just quietly steals the future and leaves the receipts in someone else's country. So why didn't Japan just raise wages? Because the whole machine was built for stability, not growth. Lifetime employment means companies carry workers through bad decades, but repay themselves by never raising pay. Seniority systems reward staying, not performing. Thousands of small suppliers survive on razor-thin margins and cheap loans, unable to afford raises. And the deflationary mindset closes the loop. Firms can't raise wages because they can't raise prices, and they can't raise prices because no one's wages went up. Every piece is individually rational. Together, they built the most comfortable trap in economic history. And yet the ice is finally cracking. The global inflation wave of 2022 did what 20 years of money printing couldn't. It forced Japanese prices to move. In 2024, Japan's big companies agreed to the largest wage hikes in 33 years, over 5%. The Bank of Japan raised interest rates for the first time in 17 years, ending the world's last negative rate experiment. The Nikkei finally broke its 1989 record. For the first time since the bubble, Japanese workers are getting real raises and companies are daring to charge more. It's early. It's fragile. Inflation is already cooling again. But after 30 years, the clock is ticking once more. So what does Japan teach the rest of us? That deflation is not a discount. It's a trap with a 30-year exit. That an economy can be safe, clean, functional, and still quietly lose a generation of prosperity without a single dramatic crash. And that the price of money is really a belief system. When a whole society stops believing tomorrow will cost more, no central bank on earth can easily change its mind. The next time you hear someone wish prices would just stop rising, show them the country where that wish came true. It looked like paradise. It cost 30 years. Japan didn't set out to become the world's best travel deal. It froze, and the world moved on around it, one raise at a time, until the most expensive country on earth woke up as the cheapest rich country in it. The melons are still $100, though. Some things survive any economy. If this changed how you think about prices, do 3 quick things. Tap like so more people find the video. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And turn on notifications because next time we visit the country that ran the opposite experiment. A century ago it was richer than France. It has the best farmland on earth. And it has now defaulted on its debts 9 separate times. Argentina, how to go broke, over and over forever. All the sources are in the description. This has been the Money Atlas. See you in the next one.